I'm astounded by what I'm reading right now. Here's a quote. The decoded stories of the Mayan transformers tell us that Lord Pakal was a super god with superhuman intellectual ability. He was the mind behind the legacy of the Maya. As Quetzalcoatl, he taught his people the mathematics of astronomy, spanning millions of years into the past and future. He explained the perfectness of creation, and in so doing explained the purpose of life. Harnessing the skills of an indigenous Indian people he'd left in the jungles of Central America, the messages of purification of the soul and of the reality of everlasting life. Quetzalcoatl, he taught the Maya mythology and created a pantheon of gods, small g, whose purpose it was to come to life 1,250 years later. Released after years of imprisonment in stone carvings, paintings, jewelry, architecture. In this, their final encore, they would provide 20th century man with a mind-blowing performance, telling us that what they were revealing was of the utmost importance to all of us. End of quote. It is the book, The Super Gods by Maurice M. Cotterell. The subtitle on the top is, They Came on a Mission to Save Mankind. Let me tell you that what I'm quoting, what I'm reading, is absolutely a lie. It is absolutely contrary to spiritual reality, to what God has done in Christ. And it lends itself to the end of days. It promotes and builds the precursors that will lead millions of people to embrace Antichrist as a good super god, the false prophet as a great super god. What I'm reading here in the epilogue, starting on page 168, in the book The Super Gods, is what I've been saying all along for weeks now, and weeks I've been seeing that the more we look at the Mayan prophecies, the more that we look at what is being unearthed, and how it is being unearthed, and how it is being brought back out, and how it is now infecting millions, injecting life into globalism, injecting a perspective into the coming chaos, the slaughter of human life, as a good thing, and builds the precursors for the arrival of the Antichrist and the false prophet. Let me begin again. Quote, the decoded stories of the Mayan transformers tell us that Lord Pakal was a super god with superhuman intellectual ability. Later he says, as Quetzalcoatl, he taught his people the mathematics of astronomy, spanning millions of years. Let me say that right now, that more than anything else, Quetzalcoatl would look like Nephilim, one that would impose himself as a god, small g, on the people, one that would lead the people in the building of buildings and temples, Nephilim architecture, and the architecture that would be built around human sacrifice in the broadest and most horrific sense, that would open the gateways, bring in the powers from that side to this, connect with the heavenlies in the dark side, and bring a deposit. Let me tell you my perspective. When I read this part in this book, I by God's providence, I picked it up today just because of the content, that I think that as this man, Maurice Cotterell, talks about Nephilim as if they're the super gods. As, we're going to see here in a moment what he says, comparing Quetzalcoatl, Buddha, Krishna, and Christ, all is the same. I'm going to tell you again that behind these writings are what John, in the book of 1 John, called the spirit of Antichrist. When I read these words, listen now, quote, he taught the Maya mythology and created a pantheon of gods whose purpose was to come to life 1,250 years later. Isn't that now? Isn't that about 2010 or 2012? Isn't that right where we're just about? And release after years of imprisonment. Listen to this. The writer is saying that the spirit-guided doctrines and prophecies and information and knowledge, the knowledge deposited, imprisoned. Let me tell you something. It's as if the demon gods and goddesses, it's as if the Nephilim knew that God was shutting down the human sacrifice factory of the Mayan culture of that day. It's as if they knew and did all they could to get as much of demonic doctrine deposited, preparations for the future deposited, with plots and plans that in the future they would resurrect the content that they deposited for the purpose of fulfilling the Luciferic agenda. When he says these words, that the purpose of Quetzalcoatl, I believe Nephilim, I believe a high-ordered, maybe, again, a first-generation type, one that would claim to be a god and be at the top of those temples, those ziggurats, to be worshipped. As I read Cotterell's, book here, I'm absolutely astounded as he describes Quetzalcoatl and the Mayan and the spiritual beauty, the spiritual wonder, the peaceful, beautiful descriptions and pictures of this Lord Pakal, this Quetzalcoatl. I guess he never did the research that I have here to my left. Pictures of Quetzalcoatl with a sacrificial knife, jamming it through the skull, the eyeball and the skull of a human being in human sacrifice. I guess he didn't listen to or read the information that came from the Italian archaeologists of the 50,000 to 70,000 human sacrifices. We're not talking about an earthquake. We're not talking about a flood. We're talking about the plotted, planned, agonizing, horrific, bloodshedding, pain-filled, terror-filled human sacrifice done by demonized priests or Nephilim or combination of both. Quetzalcoatl is a human sacrificing, bloodshed, human enslaving entity that, along with the entire deposit of that ancient Nephilim demonized culture, has now, as Maurice Cotterell is saying, the message and the embodiment of what they were doing and saying, he says it's an imprisonment in the stone carvings and paintings and jewelry and architecture. In this, I'm quoting now, in this their final encore, in reference to the unveiling of Mayan prophecies, Mayan spiritual teaching, in unveiling and reconnecting and even opening the doors to the exact same demon gods and goddesses that subjugated the Mayan people, used them, and led it to become a factory, like a factory of human sacrifice. Walk on the Mayan grounds, climb the stairs of the temples. It is in all those areas that thousands and thousands of humans were horrifically sacrificed. Blood was charged, spilt, used, all to open more doors. Not just for the past, but in lieu of God's shutting them down,